Retro Rebel Gamecast episode 80 is brought to you by TempleOfGeek.com, your one-stop shop for all things geek. You can find all of our episodes and fulfill your sci-fi, fantasy, and geek culture-related needs at TempleOfGeek.com. Welcome to the Retro Rebel Gamecast, where we discuss gaming and related topics. Retro Rebel is released every Friday, and you can find this episode and much more by heading to TempleOfGeek.com, iTunes, or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. You can even find us on Facebook at Temple of Geek for exclusive content and to see what else we're up to. My name is Stacy, and with me is my fellow Rebel co-host, Amanda.
Hello.
Hello. So, another week, another episode, another game?
Well, more of the same game. The ESO free play event is still ongoing. So I've been playing a bit of ESO. I reached a point where the boss just continually kills me. And if I exit to go repair my hardware, it's a pain in the nut to get back there. So I'm not really thrilled about that. I've ended up in a section of ESO where you have to get the town back to life. So if I were to teleport to the nearest town, there are no merchants or anything there. So I'd have to teleport to a completely different place. And I probably wouldn't remember how to get back to the hidden city. So, fun.
Right. Yeah.
But I did play some Plants vs. Zombies couch co-op, which was very fun. Wave-based situation. I enjoyed it.
Okay, so you played a little couch co-op, and that worked?
Yeah, it worked really good. I will say that you do kind of get used to having your full TV's view. I think it's so rare to play couch co-op these days, you forget what it was like. And I think this TV is probably maybe 50 inches, 52 inches. And I felt like a bit constricted with the size of the TV that I got. Thankfully, it's not horizontal. It was, or not vertical split screen. It was horizontal. But still, I feel like, I don't know, it reminded me of the downside of split screen, how we've all gotten so spoiled using the whole TV.
Right. We have, and our TVs have gotten bigger. They haven't gotten smaller. And we used to do couch co-op all the time, and it not be that big a deal. I mean, I remember Mario Kart. That was it. That was the thing. But now it's almost like I feel like I can't play on such a... How dare anyone ask me to play on such a small portion of the screen?
I know, it's crazy. I used to play on a 30-inch screen, split screen, and now 50 inches, and I'm like, whoa, I don't know about this, guys.
I don't know if I can do this.
Sad.
Well, all right. I remember being in the beta for ESO, for the, when they were just getting it started, and I'm not sure how many years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, for that. Something like that.
Yeah, it's been out for a long time.
Yeah, it's been at least 5 or 6 years. I was in the beta for that, and I'm pretty sure I wasn't exclusive. I mean, I know I wasn't. I'm not that big of an RPG player. I mean, I've played a lot of them, but I'm not like the person that they're calling up trying to get to test their games. But I was glad and happy and I thought it was pretty cool to get to be in the invite only beta for that game. But it was pretty. I kind of liked it, but it wasn't Warcraft, and so I just didn't want anything to do with it. And maybe it's because I didn't get into Skyrim as much or any of the other games. I bought them all and I tried them, but I just didn't enjoy them. And I think I didn't enjoy I think you play third person in the RPG, right? But can you play it in first person?
Yeah, you can play it in first. You can move the camera, but I do play it in first. I don't remember how I ended up being in first person mode, but now that I can't really get out of it, I've just gotten used to it. Although I do miss seeing my character. Although criticism, I feel like my characters in Skyrim looked way better than my characters in ESO ended up being. I don't know what's going on with the armor that they've got in ESO, but I don't like it as much.
Yeah. Well, maybe I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. I know that I think they've run into similar issues with Fallout 76, and that's another game. That's one of the only other games that I can think of off the top of my head where you can do third or first person. And there's similar type games. I mean, just I guess similar type games in theme. Obviously, the overall storyline and the setting is completely different. Yeah, I just never got into ESO, but I'm glad that you're kind of sort of enjoying it. Kind of maybe.
Yeah, you know what? It's not as bad as I remember, although I've kind of reached a point where I think I'm gonna have to put it down again, unless someone else comes by and helps me kill this boss.
Yeah, that's a challenge. That's something. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna have some of that in the only games or the games that I've been playing. Um, well, for me, I've been playing. I did not get Yoshi's Crafted World like I thought I was going to. I just haven't had a chance to download it. I
Okay.
absolutely am. Um, and it looks really fun, and I'm ready for a fun game. And before the Other Worlds comes out or whatever, the one by Obsidian, which is the first game that I'm really, really, really looking forward to this year. And unfortunately, at the end of the year games, I don't know how many games I will have played by that time. But if the beginning of the year is any indication, the first 3 or 4 months, I don't have any desire to play these games. So, uh,
Mm,
so anyway, World of Warcraft is where it's at for me right now. Patch 8.1.5 came out,
okay.
and this released a couple new factions. A couple new races, not factions, but races. Some new storylines for the main lore, and I'm actually really into the lore. I bought a couple of the Chronicle books, and I need to get the last one. And I bought the Rise of the Lich King audiobook. I have pretty much all of the Warcraft books, so I'm gonna say I'm a fan, and I'm gonna say I kind of like the story, and that's kind of why I play it. I mean, I'm in a guild, and I talk to the guildies, but I haven't raided with any of them. I've done a couple island expeditions, and none of this means anything to you. I know.
I mean, yeah, you're just saying words, but it's okay. I'm following along.
Well, for those that do know, I mean, the island expeditions. This is basically it's a three person instance type deal where there are a bunch of islands around kind of the main questing areas that you're in the game, and the MacGuffin of this expansion is Azurite, and each area level kind of has an ore that you can mine, and over the last 4 or 5 expansions or 3 or 4 expansions, there have been ores that you can mine that are basically like calcified blood of either an old god or calcified blood of the Titan soul that's in the actual planet. And this particular Azurite, this stuff that you can mine, it has magical properties. Kind of, it actually can affect your power. So just by touching it, it can make you stronger and more intelligent and so on and so forth. So like you can see things almost like seeing the future, and that ties into the actual story. That ties into a number of other plot threads. But these island expeditions, basically, you're taking a 3-man group out to these islands to get as much of the Azurite as you can, and then get back on the boat. And they're actually a lot of fun because they're relatively short. You can get little trinkets and pets, and if you look real close on the ground, there will be these shining doubloons. And if you collect enough of the
Okay.
doubloons, you can in-game currency. Then I can go buy other digital in-game pets and mounts and things like that. So. But anyway, they're fun. Though the island expeditions are fun. I'm working on a rep for one of the factions in the game, and the rep grinds are always, to me, one of the worst things about a new expansion is having to log in every day and like a job. But
Mhm.
there are enough other fun things in the game that I don't mind it quite as much. I think the problem is I just don't have a whole lot of time as dad and husband and coach and employee, I don't have enough time to do some of those quests. So, but I've enjoyed it. I have enjoyed it. I'm going to switch gears to another Blizzard game that both of us have played and have a harsh criticism for it. I think it may even warrant an episode of its own later. But Hearthstone, I'm not sure I'm weaning myself off of Hearthstone, but it may be pushing me away. It's not me. It's
Really?
you, Hearthstone. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I gave up on it when I stopped going to the gym.
Yeah. Well,
As these things happen.
Well, yeah. So the thing with Hearthstone is they're coming out with their another expansion. It's getting to the point now where if you don't spend money on the game, you really can't play. There are too many expansions, and then if you want to play in the meta, you want to be a part of the conversation or whatever you want to call it, and you want to play with the most current decks and be kind of in the mix with. This is what I think essentially the tournaments do is you're playing with the most, and this is how the game stays fresh. I think for the most part is how you mix and match the new cards with old cards and then they eliminate some of those. I guess it's the three. There are 3 expansions that are retired to Legends, and a lot of those cards are the cards that I've been using for like the last year and a half or 2
Really?
years.
Oh.
Yeah, and so that means that I'm gonna have to overhaul my deck completely. And anyway, going into it right now though, I'm getting my butt kicked by people, and I was getting to the point where I could get to 16, rank 16, 14, sometimes even 13, without a whole lot of effort. In terms of like, I didn't have to grind to do it. I could win 3 or 4 here, log out, come back, win 3 or 4. I'm not winning any right now. Like I'll log in and it's just not fun. I'll spend 15 or 20 minutes and then lose. And like I said, I know I'm not a ranked player, but I'm in the top 50 percentile, and which I'm okay with in this instance. Maybe if I was graduating high school, I might not be quite as proud of that particular statistic, but in Hearthstone, I'm okay with it.
I mean, it's fine.
In the 50th percentile, and that's not to say I'm the 50th percentile. I'm below it. I just don't know where, somewhere in there. Anyway, so it's getting to the point where I'm having to spend money. So right now they're about to come out with another expansion, and to get enough cards really for me to be able to play. Bottom line is, too long didn't read from last week.
TLDR.
This will be my last expansion. If I buy this one, this will be my last expansion. I have enough dust, and I can break down a number of cards from other sets, like the Warrior set or the Warlock set that I don't play with, to get enough dust to make the cards that I want. But I can't do it again. It'll take me another 2 or 3 expansions because I'm not just going to buy a bunch of packs. I just don't have the money to do that. I don't want to do that. I normally just dust all the cards from the sets that I don't use. That way I can get enough to create it for the one set that I do use, which is usually the mage.
Right.
And that's worked well for the most part because I'll buy the 40-pack set, at the beginning, which costs you $50 or something like that. Or it's 50 packs for $49 or something, $1 a pack. And that usually that's never been a bad investment, at least not up to this point. But the fact that, they've kind of nerfed the mage to a certain extent, or they made it to where you have to play a certain deck to win. I don't enjoy playing with those cards. Does that make sense? It's like you want to play the way you want to play, and there should be multiple ways.
That's why you're supposed to be able to build a custom deck.
Right. Well, they in the meta they figured out that there were really only 3 or 4. At any given time there may only be 3 or 4 different characters or sets that can actually, like right now, Hunter, Paladin, Hunter, Paladin, Mage may be up there, but I doubt it. Rogue, you know, that maybe those four are the only ones that really are at the top. You know, that's who people are competing with. And if you're playing anything else and you win, you got lucky, you know. But generally speaking, you know, you just wouldn't win. So anyway, I may be on my way out with Hearthstone. I really enjoyed it while it lasted, but I'll keep you posted. But I'm weak, and I probably will still play. So.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, that brings us to our news of the day, and much of the news that we were going to talk about today is coming out of the UK. I had shared a couple articles, and you had some as well. So, did you want to lead? You had a pretty good article.
Yeah. So, coming out of the BBC the other day, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo are all under investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority here about the automatic renewal of subscriptions. And it's funny because this literally just happened to me at the end of the month, last month, where my Xbox Live subscription automatically renewed for another year. Now, they didn't send me any notification that this was happening at all prior to it happening. And I think that's the sort of practice that they're coming under fire for. So there are quite strict protections, consumer protections rights in this country and the rest of the EU. And the concern is that the CMA is actually doing the investigation because a super complaint was lodged by Citizens Advice, which is sort of free legal advice service here in the UK. And the practice has been known as the loyalty penalty. So customers who stay with the brand a long time across any sort of brand often will find that their contracts are automatically renewed, and to exit the contract, there may be high fees, or it may just be a difficult and time-consuming process if you did want to cancel. So they're all under investigation. Only Microsoft has responded so far. But at the moment, the big three are getting put under the microscope for their practices when it comes to auto renewals. I thought that was an interesting story, and I think it'll be challenging to get a ruling that actually makes much of a difference, because the reality is that even if they change the process to alert you in advance, all you're really going to be able to do is change your billing type, because you can't access a majority of services unless you have Xbox Live. So it's really kind of pointless to assume that people who have a console are actually going to cancel the service, because it's so ingrained as part of the offering. It's much like thinking that you're going to have an iPhone or something and cancel your iTunes account. You just really can't. So it may help consumers make better budgeting choices. So if they have the opportunity to take an annual subscription, or if they're short on cash and need to take a monthly subscription in the meantime, it may give them a bit more flexibility. But I don't really feel like cancellation is an option. I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
Well, I know that Xbox's website in particular is difficult to maneuver, especially if you're trying to, like when I was trying to recover my gamer tag, and I was transferring it from, I guess, my Xbox 360 to the Xbox One. Anyway, it was a mess. I could log into my Xbox, but I couldn't get on to the website, and which didn't make sense, and with my gamer tag, and so just it was like they didn't communicate, and to be completely honest, I had not thought about it until you brought this to my attention, or this particular article, because to me, canceling my my subscription service wasn't really something I was considering, and so I'd never gone through the process of trying to do it. It was kind of like, if I've got an Xbox, having Xbox Live is ubiquitous. You know, I'm going to have them both, because otherwise your Xbox is and then you just play games that you have in your hand like a hard copy of, and who does
But
that?
you can't really update them. Most of them have
No,
like
you
day one
can't.
DRM.
Yeah, so like sometimes you'll have to you'll put them in and they may not work as intended, which I think that's also wrong. I think that's part of the issue, and maybe the idea that they have enough people playing that they're not worried about the other. Maybe, perhaps, I don't know. This is. I mean, that's. I think it's good though. I think it's good what they're doing, investigating them because, to be honest, I remember just recently my PlayStation, my PS Plus service automatically renewing, but it told me it did it as it did it. It didn't tell me, that
Yeah, that's
you're.
helpful.
Well, it is, and the same thing with, but same thing with Netflix. Only with Netflix, they actually told me when it was coming, and they told me months in advance. And I think most of that was because they were about to go up in price. And so here in America, they're going up in price, and I think part of that's because of the. I couldn't explain all of the reasons. I think one of the main reasons is they're doing a lot of their own stuff now because Disney and Marvel pulling all of their stuff off of the service April 7th, I think, which is today. Oh, shed
They're
a
doing
tear.
what?
Netflix, all of the Marvel and Disney stuff is being pulled off of Netflix, because Disney is doing their own streaming service.
Wow.
Yeah, and so if you liked, which I did, I liked to stream the Clone Wars. I watched all the Guardians movie. The Guardians 2 is on there.
Yeah.
Ant-Man and the Wasp is on there. Infinity War was on there. It's not anymore. Not as of today. So, or as
Oh
of the
my
time of this
God.
recording. Yeah. So it's going up, but they also, I think that's also to acquire licenses for other movies. I still think Netflix is the best version of all of these so far, and has the best service, the best selection, the best original content. I think Hulu has some good content too, and this isn't controversial. I mean, people are all over the board with these opinions, and Hulu is a little bit different, and it's cheaper. But to get the real service, you have to pay considerably more for Hulu to get the service without all of the commercials. And so I like paying $12 for Netflix, and I get plenty of. I spend at least
Yeah.
2 hours just looking for a movie, then turning it off and going to sleep. So,
Lovely.
yeah, so I get all the entertainment I need. Look at all these movies. I guess I'll just go to sleep. Sounds like my daughter's not very happy. Maybe the mic's not picking up the crying, so that's good.
No, it's fine. He's all right.
So that's I thought that was interesting. I sent an article about Prince Harry and Fortnite, which I think might lend itself a little bit to the topic today too. So we can kind of get into that later. Yeah, I guess let's just save the rest of these stories to kind of build on with our actual topic because they all are kind of around
Okay.
that same area. So we have a news story about Prince Harry. Then there's a little bit of information out of China as well. All of this stuff surrounding our main topic today, which we wanted to discuss a little bit of this banning games and just are they bad? I mean, is banning games? What's wrong with this picture, really? And the way I titled the episode, it was, so you want to ban games. So I guess going into this, you've got some, just basically because of your job, you've got some insight into this area as well, I think, and probably because a lot of these news stories are coming out of the UK, you may have some insight on some of these stories as well. So I guess just a little bit of background about what it is that we wanted to talk about. Government banning, government involved in video games, banning, ratings, censorship, I guess. When does
Yeah.
it cross the
So
line?
what purpose does government getting involved in games actually serve? Is there a benefit? Is it always bad? Is it something that we should look at kind of with a microscope? Is it case by case? Is there, I just really wanted to get into the idea of the government getting involved in your entertainment because
Yes.
it's different from a lot of other types of government involvement. Obviously, governments have the right to tax and serve the public good and all sorts of things, protection, national security, and every government pretty much works that way. However, when you start getting into entertainment, at what point should people have the freedom to choose the media that they consume? So, I listed a couple things: banning ratings, criminalization, censorship, and I think maybe if we start with the tamest bit of involvement and then go and hit the ban stick kind of and criminalization kind of on the far end of the spectrum and just generally see how we feel about these elements. So if we start with ratings, which to me seem like the smallest amount of government or regulatory interference in games, providing parents and consumers with an idea of the content of the game without having to uh, play the game themselves or consume any of the media in advance. So I think that ratings are good. They are not government overstep. They allow people to determine what they want to put into their brain without
Right.
having to consume any of it in advance. Because if you didn't have any ratings, the only way that you would be able to see what was in a game was to read reviews, or watch let's plays. And at that point, you've already consumed some of it at some point.
Well, and to be honest, there's no objectivity there. You know, if you really look at it, if somebody wants to sell you something, then they can show you just the best parts of it, or they can hide a lot of the things that are that are bad or maybe misleading. It happens in movie trailers, but you can still go into a movie realizing that this is PG-13. The content is meant for people 13 or older, and anyone under that, use your discretion. Um, and then it gives a list of a few themes maybe that may be more adult in that movie that you don't want your kids to see or whatever. Just at least you'll go in educated. And the same thing can be said for the ratings. And I agree with you. I don't think it's overstep. I think it's a good base point. That or a foundation to work from where parents can make educated decisions about games that they're buying.
And I think even though I'm not a parent, I use ratings because I really don't like to consume negative or horror based entertainment. It does give me
Right.
nightmares even as a grown adult, and like I have to be productive and live my life. So when I look at ratings as just a normal consumer, I'm looking to see if there's any horror, violence, like torture, that sort of stuff. I just don't find it enjoyable in any sense. So I really tend to avoid it, and I find that ratings help me do that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. Even though sometimes I can tell by the title or the cover if it's horror, and even if it's not mature, I'm like, nope.
Sometimes, and you know what would have helped me if I had looked at the ratings for Grand Theft Auto 5 before
Right.
I interacted with that torture scene that I have not been able to get that out of my mind for a long time.
Yeah, I didn't think
And
about it, but yeah, as you were describing that, I was like, I bet that's what she's talking about. Yeah.
yeah, because sometimes you can't tell. Sometimes the box art is misleading, or it looks like maybe it would be like, what was that? L.A. Noire. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not a horror game, but it really edged the line to what I enjoy consuming.
Right. It's pretty immersive. I mean, in that respect, where yeah, I'd agree. The music plays a role. The content, yeah, I liked that game, but I didn't finish it, and it
I
had,
think I
yeah,
did finish it. I don't think I did well though.
yeah, I didn't either. I don't care how good their faces looked and whatever rotoscoping they did. I couldn't tell if they were looking at me like they were about to lie. I couldn't. I
Oh
just
yeah,
couldn't
that was
tell.
impossible to
It
tell.
was impossible. It's like, is he lying?
Okay,
I don't know.
so ratings is probably the softest one. If I was going to go up the line, I would say censorship is the next
Okay.
one. So, censorship, the best example I have from this actually does come out of the EU and Australia. So, the Stick of Truth, and pretty much I think every South Park game faces serious censorship in the EU and Australia. They, instead of removing content from their game, they just put up this like faceplate in the middle of your experience. Says, sorry, people in Australia, it's like got a sad koala on it. Like you would be seeing a scene about this and this and this, but because it's censored, just enjoy this sad koala or whatever.
Right.
And the same sort of thing exists in the EU. Now, I find that to be slightly an overstep. I think if you have purchased the game, you're aware, hopefully you've looked at the ratings, you're aware what it's about, and you know like what you're in for. I start to, when things get removed out of games, I start to raise a red flag. I think that's the most extreme example that I've seen in recent times. And in some instances, I would recommend censorship. And in a couple instances, one, where the content of the game already violates existing laws. So, a good example is some of the games that exist on Steam in the US are actually illegal over here because they contain hate speech or they
Right.
are discriminatory against a protected group. So over here, hate speech is a criminal offense. So unlike the sort of seemingly unabashed freedom of speech that you have in the U.S., there are some things over here that you are not allowed to say. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a step in the right direction to prevent the most hateful elements of our society from having a voice, and being able to execute that voice in a way that is hateful and harmful and damaging the public good. So in those instances where some content of the game is already violating a law, I think that is probably acceptable. Obviously, we all have murder laws in every country, and you could extrapolate that back and say, like, well, then they'd have to ban every single game because every game has murder in it. But I'm more talking about the damaging ideologies because even as adults, the prevalence of fake news and, all this conspiracy theories, it does show that people are subject to becoming brainwashed by the content that they consume. So I think hateful and damaging ideologies where that is shown to be the way that society should operate, that really starts to strike a negative chord with me, and I wouldn't be offended if that was censored. And I'm talking about very extreme examples where the idea is to glorify hate crimes or glorify murder, like the game Hatred, like there was one where you just like kill drag queens and stuff like that. I just
Wow.
think that that's not acceptable in an enlightened society, and people shouldn't want to consume that as entertainment. You're basically saying that it's entertaining to be discriminatory and carry out hate crimes, and I don't think that's
Well, I think
acceptable.
you're right, and I think the wording is, yeah, you probably shouldn't want to either, but you should be limited in your ability to consume stuff like that, where it is perpetuating and glorifying just empty, uh, hateful, potentially damaging, psychologically material like that. Yeah, I'd agree, because this is where we start splitting hairs and then getting, I don't know if we say that we're on one side or the other, because I think we're definitely on one side, but I feel like people get all bent out of shape when you start talking about censorship, and when you start talking about banning things or eliminating things or curbing things, and they do it without really thinking about the words that you're using or the content that's actually being limited. That you should be able to say or do whatever you want. You should, but there should also be you should also have to reap the consequences of those things, and that's the flip side to it that a lot of people don't understand. Yeah, you should be able to say whatever you want, but then if somebody arrests you, or if you get your teeth punched in, well, those are consequences of you saying whatever you want, and just because you can doesn't mean you should. And but that's are we are we making decisions for people because we feel like they can't make their own? I think that's, again, I'm playing devil's advocate to a certain extent, but also supporting your point. And I know that it doesn't sound like that, but just stay with me. I think you are right. I just don't know how to say it in a way that is exactly what I mean. I don't know if that makes sense. And I think that will be more clear as we continue on, because we've got more examples of this where, you shouldn't. If the game is about seeking and murdering drag queens, well, that in and of itself is a pretty empty plot theme, and really shouldn't exist. That sounds like basically you're just targeting a group because of hate or because of no reason other than to do it, and that's even worse, if that's possible. But if there is, let's say, for instance, in like a game like Grand Theft Auto, if there is someone who is a cross-dresser or a drag queen who also is a mob boss, and there are these plot threads that lead to this person, and that is just one component. That is not the why. That just happens to be something that describes this individual. And the quest is, or the goal is, you got to take out this mob boss who is also a drag queen, and maybe it's at a drag show or something to that effect. But this person, has done all of these other things, and the reason you're taking them out is because of that. It's like that. That's filling out the story. That's so much more. That's just one part of who this person was. And I feel like that's looking at it completely different than having a game that's just about murdering, drag queens.
So you made an interesting point there about are you taking away their choice? Are you making a decision for them? Now, it's funny because if you were to ban it, then yes. Censorship is a more gentle approach where you remove offensive content contained within the whole. So right. There may be a scene that does not exist for you in this country. Now, what I think that is a corrective action. And in the EU, they really love corrective actions. So a couple examples not related to gaming that exist in the EU. So we have a plastic bag charge. Now, the goal is to encourage people to use cloth shopping bags and, reusable or boxes or recyclable materials instead of plastic. So it costs you 5 to 10 pence every time you shop for every single bag that you use that you did not bring with you. That has had a pretty significant effect on me personally. Now, I don't know what the statistics are for the whole country, but in general, my use of bags that I get at the shop has almost become zero. In fact, whenever I have to pay the charge, I'm upset that I didn't have enough forward thinking to bring a bag with me. Right. I have a big collection of cloth bags. I regularly use them. It has changed my behavior in a more kind of sustainable way. So that corrective action had an immediate impact. Now, a recently passed thing, so the bag thing was passed a couple of years ago. Very recently, within the last few months, they've passed a sugar tax. So beverages, candies, that sort of thing, they all cost more. Diet Coke or Coke Zero is cheaper than regular Coke. The goal is to get people to stop consuming so much sugar. We have an obesity crisis of our own that we're dealing with, and a lot of it is linked to, unhealthy consumption of fizzy drinks and so on and so forth. And I'm assuming that they're going to be probably levying a fast food tax or an unhealthy food tax probably within the next few years. We have a very advanced food rating system. So the content of fat, sugar, I think carbohydrates, maybe something else, is listed in a like traffic light sort of setup on every single food packet. So you can see how much of your daily salt intake, your fat intake that you are meeting or exceeding on the outside of the package. So if anything's got red on it, I feel like the natural extension of the sugar tax is that anything that is outside your daily recommendation for any one of those four kind of key areas is going to be levied at a higher rate. And this causes people, and it has caused me, to choose alternative drinks instead of, because I'm not really a huge fan of Diet Coke. I don't really like the flavor, but it's made me choose more healthier options like flavored sparkling water or juice or coffee or something like that, instead of just all this fizzy drink all the time. So it does, corrective action can make behavioral changes. And I see censorship as a form of corrective activity in media. So it could be effective in some circumstances.
No, the thing, I agree with you. I agree with you. I guess I don't want to be the one that has to make the decision as to what is, some things to me are easy to decide, and some things are much more difficult. I didn't play that part of the game that you did with the torture, and I don't know that necessarily should have been removed or censored, but the fact that it's in there and that this will get. I think all of this will lead to another point that we will get to maybe even shortly.
Yeah.
That maybe parents should be more involved in these things. Anyway, so did you have another point you wanted to go into? We did censor. You did.
We did rating, censorship. So now we're going to go into banning.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm placing a difference between banning and criminalization. So banning is just removing the easy access to the game. Right. Making it so that you can't get it in the traditional method or whatever. I'm sure you would be able to get it if you downloaded it off a torrent site or something like that. Technically, you're already violating the law by doing that, but I'm not talking about people actually getting prosecuted for playing a game. We will get to that, but this is just banning. All right. So I think this may be where our thoughts diverge. We'll see. So those same examples that I had about the game Hatred and some of the other completely pointless, hate-filled and discriminatory or pointlessly violent content, I think that if a society as a whole has in their constitution, in their core values, that this is not what they support, and something very clearly butts up against that. So I'm talking about, we do have hate speech and things like that is a tenet of our legal practice. So if something contains and mostly contains that sort of thing, I think a society or a government is well within its rights to say that this doesn't represent what we as a society believe, and so we will not be allowing the sale of that good in this country. Much like how in some states in the US, it's legal to purchase marijuana for recreational use. As a society, that group of people has voted and said that they find it fine. So I think that if people have agreed over the course of, a couple hundred years in the case of the US or a couple thousand years in the case of the UK and the EU, if a society has come to a collective agreement about what they think is acceptable, then I think they're well within their rights to say what is not acceptable. And if it's a commercial product, if it's being sold for money, then they should have the right to say what's not allowed on their store shelves. And so I make a very specific distinction between art and a commercial product. If it's art, if it's not being sold, if it's meant to stir up emotion or make a statement, that's different. I'm talking about a commercial product, as most games are at the end of the day. And because countries have the right to allow or not allow the sale of any sort of goods that they want. That's sort of their prerogative. And I think that banning a commercial product that they believe is harmful to the public good or violates their kind of collective societal values should be fine. What do you think?
Who decides that? Like what is the collective? And I guess I ask that, and it can be rhetorical because I don't know. Is it the government? Because I can tell you, if you, depending on who you ask in our country, if you say, if the government's going to make the decision, it doesn't matter if you're far right or far left. None of them really think they have our best interest in mind, but they're still going to argue about it and like about which one's better, even though they think they're both wrong, which I find fascinating and a little bit depressing. But that said, I think that in terms of banning, I think the true ban hammer to content media should be reserved for the most egregious examples of violations of kind of like whatever social mores are in place. And I guess that's kind of what answers my own question, like what defines this society. Hey, welcome to Retro Rebel. We are being very heady today.
Yeah, hope you brought your tea because we're spilling it.
Yeah, put on your thinking caps. The idea that that society is going to dictate kind of what's okay, and it's hard to define because it changes over time. It was cool to have people mauled to death in a coliseum by lions at one time, and for everybody to see that. To have that done on live television now is not going to happen, right? So to have not yet anyway. We may get back there. I don't know, but as of right now, we don't do that. And so there are a lot of things that socially are just kind of understood and defined by the collective, and that's kind of what is acceptable in a given day and age. I know that sounds very vague and nebulous, but it's on purpose because it is fluid. It changes over time. So with that said, I do think that there are things that should be. I think the ban hammer is reserved for very extreme things. I think censorship should be where the majority of the cut material, that's where I think it comes from. I think that you can have something that's just awful, and then you censor, or you kind of like how some movies have to cut parts out just to make it. You can't sell this game. How about that? But you could maybe send it out for free. I don't know. And then if you send it out for free, then you have to understand that the content and blah, 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 there has to be some kind of recourse for that if you're sending out something that is hate or something that is perpetuating fear or that is just generally has no positive influence on society, I guess. Like what purpose did...
It's funny because your perspective, obviously now that I live in Europe, I realize how much more liberal Europe actually is with media and entertainment, which is sometimes why I find it quite weird that we do get weird censorship in games. There is a program that exists on live television, and I think it comes on at like maybe 9 p.m., maybe 10 p.m., and it is a dating show where people date in the nude without any censorship bars, starting from the feet and working up. And then they choose their partner from the ground up. And that is on live television in the absolute nude. Now that would never exist in the majority of the United States. Maybe somewhere extremely liberal like California or maybe even New York, but the majority of the US, it definitely wouldn't be on a national television channel, I can tell you that.
No, that's not going to happen.
But that to me speaks towards what the society has come up with, what they think is acceptable and what isn't. The fact that show exists over here, means that people who are selling a commercial product know that it would be well received over here and it wouldn't be well received in the US.
No,
Um,
there needs to be violence in your commercial over here, then it's good. There needs to be sex in the commercial over there, then it's good. And
basically.
basically, and I think that that's such a fascinating reversal of roles, or just a fascinating difference between the two regions. And I think it's reflective in society and in the culture, and that's not rocket surgery to see that correlation, you know.
All right.
And
So egregious examples, I think the ban stick is reasonable to a certain extent. What about for public health reasons? So the article that you shared where Prince William was talking about a ban on Fortnite,
right,
I I see his point and I have a lot of opinions about it. Just to generally recap his feelings, so Fortnite has caused some problems in young children and younger adults who have a hard time separating their day-to-day responsibilities with their desire to game, and it can turn into sort of an addictive situation. I struggle with opinions like this because Fortnite, the game itself, I don't believe is damaging. And if anything, it is probably the least gratuitously violent shooting game I've seen in many years.
right.
There's no blood, there's no gore. Like, I mean, Gears of War is a worse game than Fortnite. However, it does have a lot of the psychological triggers that in the EU specifically we're really starting to look at. So things like, loot boxes are being looked at as a form of gambling, and now they're looking at Fortnite and season pass style games and like round robin battle royale style game. These games with like big multiplayer followings and all sorts. They're looking like that as a form of addictive trigger.
Well, and I think that what they'll find is it absolutely is. It's like anything else that where there's a carrot at the end of the stick, and you get a dopamine or serotonin release for achieving those things. I mean, we get it from when you're addicted to, if you're addicted to Red Bull, which I mean I'm sure billions of people are, like me, addicted to Red Bull. If you're addicted to Red Bull, the thought of having a Red Bull releases the neurotransmitters that make you feel good. And it's just the thought of it, and that's after time. That's over time of you actually becoming more addicted to them or enjoying the
Yeah.
taste and all that stuff. Just the thought of having one releases, the dopamine, and so you're getting that hit regardless. You get a dopamine hit from social media. That was something else that was listed on that Prince Harry article, and where he talked about the drawbacks of social media and how it can affect. And I realize that's beyond the scope maybe of what we're talking about, but the point is there's really no difference in your mind and how that works. The only things in the world, in life, that you care about are dopamine and serotonin. That's it. Those are the things. Now, what triggers those releases can be, a myriad of things. So if you think about playing Fortnite and get a dopamine response for that or release, then it's going to make you excited. When you don't get to do that, you get depressed. So I think that that's the short of it, and it's much more complicated than that. And we can talk about neuroscience maybe with a neuroscientist and really bore the audience. But the point is that these things, the mechanism that drives them are all the same. The mechanisms are all the same. The trigger can be different, but the trigger can be so many different things, and it's unfair and it's disingenuous to try to explain these things as if they're exclusive from that. Like gaming's not part of that. Well, yeah, gaming is in that, and Fortnite is in that, and that reward system does affect people who play it. And I think the article with Prince Harry sheds a light on maybe a bit of personal responsibility that people just are not accepting. that you should intervene in your child who's been playing that game for 33 hours or 3 hours. In later on in that article, it talks about in China actually where they're banning the playing. If you're under the age of 12, you're not even allowed to play it, and because their minds aren't developed enough to be able to handle that level of potential addiction. They don't know how to sort it. And being a communist country, they're just going to take it out of your hands and make it to where it's just not, you just can't do it. And
yeah, I think that's where I'm drawing the distinction between banning that I find acceptable and banning that I think is more of a nanny state situation. And I think banning is acceptable in the instances where the content, whatever it is, violates the core beliefs of a group of people. And
Right.
those people obviously have created those beliefs through their constitution, their legal system, their elected representatives. Like, it'll be quite obvious what those things are. But where I think it becomes a bit fruitless and pointless, and B, more of a, people being unable to control themselves, is where it's stemming from needing to control people's behavior while they're consuming otherwise societally acceptable media. The reality of it is, you can get addicted to anything. I was addicted to Starbucks for like 2 years, and I put on 15 pounds because I'll tell you what, those drinks are not calorie light.
No.
And I would salivate at the thought of getting the Starbucks.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't able to get the Starbucks, then I would feel, disappointed, like my morning was off. Like, it wasn't the coffee. It was very specifically the whole ritual of ordering on the app, going in, it'd be ready, having that very first sip. And by about 4 sips in, I wasn't enjoying the drink anymore. I was just satisfied that I had corroborated the activity that my brain wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And so you can get literally addicted to anything. People binge watch Netflix. People get addicted to the gym. People get addicted to other people. Like, it is impossible to ban all of the things in life that you would get addicted to, because it can literally be anything. There's an entire show called My Strange Addiction where people get addicted to weird shit. There's no way to effectively ban the psychological imperative of this feels good, do it more, other than willpower. And so I think that's where, for me, we start to cross the line into unacceptable nanny state territory, which I think is a good segue into criminalization.
Right. Yeah.
So
you go ahead then.
So criminalization is basically taking it one step further. This is making it illegal and punishable by criminal time, fines, community service, jail time, engaging in a specific gaming activity. So I'm less talking about fining companies for their practices. I think that's totally reasonable, and companies need to be kept in check. I'm talking about the physical gamers themselves. So in India, we recently spoke about how they had banned PUBG, and they had actually done 15 arrests of people playing PUBG. Yeah. Now, that's where I think it starts becoming unacceptable. Like, at no point should you ever be put in jail or face criminal charges for doing something that isn't harming anybody else. We all have a bit of autonomy over our own bodies. And if I want to drink 15 fizzy drinks and pay the taxes and everything that associates that in a single day and deal with the health consequences, that should be on me. That shouldn't be a criminal thing. And I think every single activity that you can do that doesn't harm anybody else shouldn't really be a criminal issue. That should be, a lifestyle choice that you're making. And I think when they get into the territory of banning people or criminalizing the playing of any game, regardless of what it is, where people actually go to jail for consuming content that exists that they can get their hands on, then I think that's where it crosses a big line for me. What do you think?
Well, the criminalization. I mean, I think that's almost so far from. Well, I guess it can be tied hand in hand with banning. Like if you're getting into like Nazi Germany and you ban something, and then if you have it, then it's criminalized banning of something. Um, or like in V for Vendetta, where to have culture or art which was banned was also criminalized. If you man, it's just such a it's I don't know that any of that would be criminalized, at least not in what we are seeing so far. Like even the game Postal or Hatred, I don't think that their existence is criminal, or to own would have been criminal. I think because it's kind of like Minority Report in a way. It's like I'm going to criminalize this and arrest you, and there will be consequences, criminal consequences for having or owning this. But you haven't done anything. Like your owning of this and perpetuating it maybe didn't do anything to anyone else, other than its existence is kind of putrid and awful and terrible and unnecessary and of no social value. But
Yeah.
again, and maybe it's the differences in countries, but it's like I personally would be like, I don't think that's criminal. I think that person is just maybe needs some mental health help, or maybe I wouldn't even know where to begin really, but I would know that it probably wouldn't be criminal. I think where it might get criminal is where your intent, and that's the hard part to prove, is your intent is to spread a particular message because and to perpetuate and even then I think criminal is extreme. Like does someone show up at your house? Is that where is it because of a digital distribution of something that maybe was anonymous? I don't know. I don't want to have to make that decision either. Because when you start talking about the criminalization of video games, I guess we're really talking about a fraction of a percentage of people who create these games, and it's for a very particular group of people. And I'm not even familiar with them. I don't even know these games until they come up into the news, because that's not the type of game I enjoy, because they're not really games. And maybe the point is, and ultimately, what would decide this is when you define what is a game and what is acceptable as a game that can be sold, and what are the themes that are involved, and these are more or less our social mores. And if you have anything outside of this and it falls under criminal definitions, which again we can go look up and we can find, and maybe some of those need to be adapted for digital content. I don't know if their definitions kind of cover those things or not. I imagine they don't, because of how quickly digital content changes. But I think as you move down that list that you had, from ratings to censorship to banning to criminalization, that the group or the application of it becomes much more strict. I think as ratings go, lots of things can fall under E for everyone. Lots of things can fall under mature. But as you work down to the more strict ratings, you're limiting only certain things to those ratings. Maybe extremely explicit sexual content or violent content. Certain themes should be applied under that. And I think that those are readily are the definitions are readily available, and I think that's more or less how that's done. Censorship again should be less prevalent. You should be more strict in its application and selective in its application, so that it's used only in instances when it seems like it's most necessary. Especially for
Yeah.
regional differences. and the social and moral differences between countries, and then I think there are a ton of censorship or censored differences between like different movies in China, specific to from the titles of the movies. Like the first Avenger or Captain America, the title of the movie was changed over in Asia, for obvious reasons. And I think the first Avenger may have been just what it was called because Captain America maybe didn't sell as well in Asia. So, anyway, and then banning to ban something that we should have a fairly clear definition as to what would get your game banned. Violent content, rape content. For this, especially for the purposes of rape, that game should have been banned, and I don't think there's any way around it. I just think that it should have been banned, and it was pulled from Steam, and there was no place for it there. I don't know that there's a place for it, but again, because of the nature of what I do for a job, and one of the courses that I teach is on measurement and evaluation and how to objectively measure something and to do it properly and fairly. I guess the answer sometimes is you just have to stand on one side or the other and eventually have to make a decision, and the fair or completely objective, emotionally detached answer is not available. I don't know. Sometimes you just have to choose.
This is probably one of the longest episodes that we've done in a long time, but it's a very complex issue, and there are a lot of stumbling blocks along the way. But I think even as adults, at a certain point, we do need to determine what sort of content that we think is acceptable to surround ourselves with. And if as a group we decide that this is not what we stand for, then we shouldn't allow it to be part of our daily lives and present in this society. So I think we've killed this dead horse, but it was really interesting topic today.
I think so. And in closing, I'd like to say, I think that we would agree, and if I was going to take a stance on anything, one thing for sure, everything in moderation, that things can be good, but too much of anything is bad. And so have some moderation. It's difficult sometimes, but just to go outside and turn off the game and go enjoy the world around you. Parents, and those of you that will be parents, take some agency in what's happening in your lives and in your children's lives. Understand that they are going to experience things without your knowledge, but do your best to educate them on kind of what your values are. They will eventually create their own, but man, if you don't give them a foundation, then they're just going to create their own based on things that they absorb from around them. So do your job as a parent, and I think that's the only soapbox that I think feel confident to really stand on on this particular topic.
One of us has to be on the parent soapbox, and it can't be me.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so be a parent and actually know what's going on, and know what they're doing, know what they're playing, and don't be afraid to say no. Don't be because what's most important is not you censoring what your children are necessarily able to, but educating them, teaching them the things that maybe you didn't know, so that they can make good decisions on their own. You're not necessarily making it for them, although you may have to, but you're teaching them as to why that decision was made. So, oh my God, what a heavy topic.
We'll have to do something light next week.
Absolutely. Promise. Well, that wraps up this episode of Retro Rebel Gamecast. I want to thank Amanda for this week's discussion. All of the notes from this episode will be posted on our site, templeofgeek.com. If you'd like to add to the discussion or reach out with questions, sound off in the comments or email us at retrorebel@templeofgeek.com. If you like what you hear, head over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe so you'll be sure to get each episode as it's released. And rate us because that really helps our show. And you can find us on Instagram as well at Temple of Geek.
Wait.
I know. Until the next time.
See you later.